Welcome to the deep dive. Get ready, because today we're plunging into, well, a really fascinating stack of sources.
Yeah, where?
We're going to pull out some, truly valuable insights about something pretty central to all our lives: emotional intelligence.
Exactly. And this isn't just theory, right? We're doing a deep dive into how you can actually understand and hopefully improve your emotional intelligence, your maturity.
Right.
We've gathered material from, well, all over. There's a really candid Reddit thread, someone actually looking for advice.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and a practical training guide like the one used by the University of Wisconsin system and KEPRO, plus some, solid psychological analyses.
So, our mission today is pretty clear. Take all this different info and, distill the most powerful nuggets,
Mm-hmm.
the surprising facts, the practical strategies, basically how you can become more emotionally intelligent. Because it's not fixed, right? People see it as learnable.
Absolutely learnable.
And honestly, it seems essential for, well, everything. Navigating relationships, work, just handling life's curveballs.
Definitely. And you'll find the sources offer a great mix, some foundational understanding, but also like concrete steps you can actually take. Ready to jump in.
Let's do it. So, okay, starting at the beginning. Based on these sources, what's the core idea? What is emotional intelligence, really?
Well, the definition that keeps popping up is basically the ability to identify, assess, and control emotions,
Okay.
but not just your own. Also emotions in others, and even like within groups.
Okay, so it's not just about feeling stuff, but being aware of it, managing it, both inside yourself and how it affects others. And you said it's learnable. Where does that process even begin?
Yeah, so the sources really hammer this home.
Wow.
Awareness is the absolutely foundational first step. You have to know the emotions are there and what they are before you can even think about managing them.
Right.
And the great news is building that awareness, definitely a skill you can develop.
Awareness. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, one of the sources, that training guide, it gives us a kind of simplified look at the brain's role, in our emotional responses. How does that help us understand where things can go sideways sometimes?
It gives a pretty helpful model, actually. Talks about three key areas. You got the thalamus,
Okay.
which is sort of the relay station for sensory info.
Yeah.
Then there's the cortex. That's our thinking brain, right?
Yeah.
Makes sense of things, plans, responses.
The logic center.
Exactly. And then, crucially, the amygdala, part of the limbic system, really involved in processing emotions, especially things like fear and threat.
Okay, so info comes in, hits the relay, then what happens?
Well, when something triggers you, could be everyday stress like traffic, right?
Yeah.
Or something more intense like, I don't know, conflict at work.
Yeah.
The sources talk about two main pathways for how your brain can react. One path is super fast. It involves those lower brain regions, especially a quick detour through the amygdala, and that leads to those immediate, often irrational, purely emotional sort of knee-jerk reactions. The training guide actually calls this the scream and yell pathway.
The one we usually regret later.
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah.
The other pathway, it takes a slightly longer route. It sends information up to the cortex, the thinking part for processing, before a response fully forms.
Okay.
This engages those higher brain regions. It allows for a calmer, more measured response that combines the emotion with logic. That's the work to fix it pathway.
Ah, okay. So the insight here is that emotional intelligence is kind of about training your brain to default to that second path, the more thoughtful one.
Exactly that. It's about creating that little bit of space, that opportunity to pause and let your logical brain catch up, even when your emotional brain is sounding all the alarms. It's literally giving yourself a chance to choose your behavior instead of just, reacting.
That's a great way to frame it. So building on that brain stuff, what are the essential skills, the pillars of emotional intelligence that the sources kept bringing up?
Right, so beyond just awareness, several core things stand out. First is self-awareness, which we touched on. It's about really becoming a student of your own internal world,
Yeah.
recognizing feelings as they happen, understanding what shifts your mood, spotting your usual triggers and reaction patterns. And a key insight here from the sources is that the better you understand your own emotional machinery,
Yeah.
the more you automatically start to understand others too. It's kind of cool.
So self-awareness isn't just navel-gazing. It actually helps you understand other people, which leads right into the next pillar, empathy.
Yes, empathy. One source actually called it the key ingredient.
Wow.
This is where you actively try to shift your perspective, try to understand how others are feeling, and maybe why. It means asking questions, genuinely thinking about how your words or actions might land on them, trying to anticipate how they might feel.
So really putting yourself in their shoes.
Exactly. And the sources emphasize deep listening, not just hearing words, but trying to get the why behind someone's choices, their emotional state, where they're coming from.
I found those suggestions in the Reddit thread for building empathy really fascinating. Reading fiction, playing chess. How do those even connect?
It sounds a bit counterintuitive, right? But the idea seems to be that these activities train your brain to step into another perspective.
Huh.
Whether it's a character in a book or your opponent in chess, you're constantly trying to figure out motivations, anticipate reactions, think from a viewpoint that isn't yours. It's like exercising that empathy muscle in a different way.
That's actually a pretty cool takeaway. Okay, so self-awareness, empathy. What about when those emotions get really intense and you're right on the edge of that scream and yell pathway?
Right, that's where self-regulation and control comes in. Once you're aware of how you feel,
Yeah.
that's self-awareness, this is about having strategies to manage that feeling, or at least your reaction to it.
What kind of strategies did the sources suggest? Any practical tips?
Yeah, the training guide had some really concrete ones. Things like simply pausing,
Mm-hmm.
stopping for a second, stepping away from the situation if you can, taking slow, deep breaths. That came up a lot.
Classics.
Totally. And distracting activities were mentioned too. Engaging your thinking brain, your cortex, with something absorbing like a crossword puzzle, Sudoku, or maybe something creative like drawing or cooking.
Ah, so diverting your attention.
Exactly. And laughter, conscious relaxation techniques, those were also on the list.
So instead of letting the amygdala hijack you, you're consciously firing up the cortex with something else.
You got it.
Yeah.
You're buying time for that work to fix a pathway to kick in.
Yeah.
And that flows into the next idea, which is actively changing emotions. One source almost talks about it like reprogramming or rewiring your brain's automatic responses.
Reprogramming emotions. How do you even do that? Is that possible?
Well, it's more about intentionally using things, external stimuli or internal focus, to shift your emotional state. The training guide asks, like, what simple things can change your mood? And it lists examples. Maybe looking at a photo of family, the smell of coffee, listening to certain music, or even focusing on an inspiring story about someone. The key idea is you can figure out what works for you.
Ah, find your personal mood shifters.
Exactly. What sights, sounds, smells, or thoughts can reliably nudge your emotional state where you want it to go. It's about taking some agency over your internal experience.
That feels really empowering, the idea that you're not just stuck with whatever emotion washes over you. Okay, so we've got the foundations, the pillars. The sources also threw out a lot of practical resources and practices for actually building these skills. What kind of stuff came up?
Oh yeah, the Reddit thread especially was a goldmine for recommendations. Books, lots of books.
A whole reading list for EI.
Pretty much. You had the classics like Daniel Goleman's Emotional Intelligence, obviously, and Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication, which gives you specific ways to talk and listen.
Right, NVC.
Yeah. Then other popular ones people mentioned. Permission to Feel by Mark Brackett. Happiness Advantage by Sean Aker. Mindset by Carol Dweck. Some more introspective ones like The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer.
Okay.
And even books looking at family stuff like Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. And for people wanting to dig into the psychological mechanisms, Feeling Good by David Burns was mentioned.
And what about those more specific therapy approaches? Did those come up?
They did. The sources pointed to models used in therapy, like polyvagal theory, which looks at how our nervous system shapes our emotional states.
Interesting.
And internal family systems, or IFS, which helps you understand the different parts of yourself. Books on these were recommended, like Deb Dana's on polyvagal theory and Richard Schwartz's No Bad Parts for IFS.
Right.
But the Reddit discussion made a good point. You can read about IFS, sure, but working with a therapist can be really helpful, having someone patiently help you learn the language for talking about feelings.
That makes sense. Some things you learn conceptually, others you practice with guidance. Any other types of resources mentioned?
Yeah, online stuff came up, specifically the Healthy Gamer GG YouTube channel and podcast with Dr. K. Apparently it has discussions, even live therapy sessions you can watch.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, offers insight into emotional processes. And then for a practical tool, there's an app called How I Feel, developed by a Yale professor, supposed to help you track and understand your feelings day to day.
So apps, books, videos, a whole toolkit out there. What about just daily practices? Things you can just do.
Breath work.
Yeah.
That was highlighted as really key. Start small, but do it consistently.
Like a daily habit.
Exactly. Belly breathing specifically was mentioned, helps shift your focus, calm your nervous system. The overall vibe was treat EI like a muscle. You got to work it out regularly to see results.
It's not a one and done thing, it's ongoing practice.
Totally. And one perspective offered a kind of refreshing angle. Maybe instead of starting with all the complex theories, just focus on genuinely caring about others. How so? Like, regularly ask yourself, how are my actions affecting this person? Just cultivating that concern. One comment even connected this to insights from near-death experiences.
Really?
Yeah, how people often reflect on how they treated others, suggesting that perspective can tap into, like, deeper wells of empathy.
That's a really thought-provoking connection. Wow. Okay, so we built the foundation, looked at the tools. Why do all this work? What are the actual benefits of boosting your emotional intelligence?
Oh, the upsides are significant, and they came up across the sources.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, people with higher EI, they're described as more positive, more enjoyable to be around.
Makes sense.
They have that increased self-awareness we talked about,
Yeah.
and naturally a better understanding of other people too.
And what about, say, in a work environment? Any specific benefits there?
Yeah, the training guide listed some really concrete ones for the workplace. Staying calm under pressure, resolving conflicts more effectively, leading with empathy, delegating better, more emphatically.
So practical skills.
Very practical. The overall impact: increased productivity, becoming better employees, better leaders, colleagues, teammates. It just improves how people work together.
It really sounds like a fundamental skill that just ripples out into everything.
It really seems to.
Okay, so to make some of this more concrete and to see how nuanced emotions can be, our sources actually did a deeper dive into one specific feeling: pride. Which is interesting, right? Because pride can feel good, but it's also got this history of being seen as negative, like even a sin. So is pride good or bad? Virtue or vice?
This is where the sources offer a really valuable distinction, I think. Philosophically, you look back at someone like Aristotle. He saw pride defined as, like, knowing and being worthy of great things as a virtue.
Okay.
He argued it was good because it reflected the truth about a person's merit. He contrasted it with vanity, thinking you're great when you're not, or pusillanimity, which is undervaluing yourself.
So for Aristotle, earned pride based on reality was a positive.
Exactly. It was about accurate self-assessment. But, like you said, religiously, pride often gets a totally different rap.
Yeah.
Often cited as, like, the root of all evil or a deadly sin.
Hmm.
The focus there is more on the potential for arrogance, looking down on others, that kind of thing.
A pretty stark contrast. So what does the psychological research, like that analysis from the UBC Emotion and Self Lab, add to this picture?
This research brings some, well, empirical clarity. It basically finds that pride isn't just one single thing. It consistently splits into two distinct types or facets, even though they're related.
Two kinds of pride. Okay, this feels like a key insight.
It really is. They identify authentic pride. This is characterized by the feeling, I'm proud of what I did.
Okay, action-focused.
Right. And this type of pride pops up when you attribute your success to internal causes that you see as unstable and controllable. Things like effort, practice, hard work, persistence.
Like, I'm proud I put in the hours to finish that tough project. That kind of feeling.
Exactly like that. And here's where it gets really interesting. Authentic pride is strongly linked to positive outcomes. Genuine high self-esteem, pro-social behaviors, getting along, high achievement motivation, creativity, productivity, even altruism.
Wow.
It correlates with positive personality traits, too. Being outgoing, agreeable, conscientious, emotionally stable, open to experience. The research suggests it reinforces adaptive behaviors, helps motivate long-term goals, achieving status through actual contribution.
That sounds much more like Aristotle's virtue idea. So what's the other type then?
That's hubristic pride. This one is characterized more by the feeling, I'm proud of who I am.
Ah, identity focused.
Yeah, and it comes from attributing success to internal causes, seen as stable and uncontrollable. Things like inherent ability, natural talent, fixed traits you think you just have.
So more like, I'm proud because I'm just naturally smart, or I'm just better than others.
Precisely. And the associations here, very different. Hubristic pride is linked with fragile self-esteem, narcissism, being prone to shame.
Oh.
It correlates negatively with desirable traits like agreeableness and conscientiousness. And it can contribute to aggression, hostility, significant interpersonal problems, relationship conflict.
That definitely sounds more like the traditional sinful pride, the negative kind.
It really does. And the research suggests it might even function as a kind of defense mechanism, possibly covering up a deep-down lack of self-worth.
Interesting.
It might be like a shortcut aimed at getting immediate, maybe fleeting status or admiration, more about getting ahead than getting along. Some research even links it to darker traits like psychopathy or Machiavellianism. And a key piece can be social comparison, feeling proud because you see yourself as better than others.
So the really powerful insight here is the surface feeling of pride might seem similar, but the root cause, what you tell yourself, is responsible for your success that makes all the difference in whether it's healthy or harmful.
That's absolutely the core finding. The type of achievement might not even be different, but how you appraise it, what you attribute it to effort and controllable actions versus fixed traits and inherent superiority that determines whether you experience authentic pride, which is adaptive, or hubristic pride, which can be pretty destructive.
That's a really profound distinction, both for understanding ourselves and maybe understanding others too. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground. How do you take all this theory and actually, put it to use, make it practical?
Yeah, well, the training guide had a simple, but I think really powerful exercise. Think about a recent emotional interaction or situation,
Mm-hmm.
maybe at work, maybe at home, one that didn't go quite as well as you'd hoped.
Okay,
Maybe you reacted in a way you regret, or maybe pride, one type or the other, played a role.
got one in mind, yeah.
Okay. Now, using the framework we've just been talking about today, try to analyze it.
Yeah.
What was the initial trigger? What was your immediate gut reaction emotionally? What was the actual outcome? And then critically, based on what we've learned about engaging that higher brain pathway, practicing empathy, using those self-regulation tricks like pausing or deep breaths, or even understanding the difference between authentic and hubristic pride and where they come from. What could you potentially have done differently? Where was the opportunity for a different response?
That makes the learning really immediate, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Applying it right away.
Exactly. It bridges that gap between just understanding the concept and actually applying it. And then finally, following the guide's suggestion, pick just one specific thing, one takeaway from today that you'll actually commit to practicing or focusing on to become more emotionally intelligent.
Just one thing.
Yeah, make it concrete. Actionable, don't try to boil the ocean.
Like the breathwork idea, start small. That feels achievable.
Exactly. Small steps, consistently.
Okay, so to quickly recap this whole deep dive then, we've seen that emotional intelligence isn't some fixed thing, it's a critical, learnable skill
Yeah.
built on self-awareness, empathy, and self-regulation. It's really about training your brain to respond thoughtfully, not just react emotionally. And we saw how digging into the nuances of even a single emotion like pride, understanding that crucial difference between authentic pride from effort versus hubristic pride from fixed traits, can give incredible insight.
Yeah, understanding that distinction, authentic versus hubristic, that's a powerful lens for looking at your own feelings and maybe understanding others' behavior too.
Right. Which kind of leaves us with a final thought for you to consider. If the source of your pride, whether you chalk up success to your hard work or just being inherently better, if that determines whether pride leads to connection or conflict,
Mm.
how might actively focusing on cultivating the sources of authentic pride effort, practice controllable actions, how might that fundamentally change how you approach challenges, how you interact with people, and maybe even how you view your own worth?
That's a great question to chew on.
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.
Yeah.